Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We'll move on to the fifth khiyar or the fifth choice, which is called the khiyarul aib, the choice given because of a defective item. First of all, it is haram to sell an item which is defective whilst you know it is defective. The Prophet authentically said in the Musnad of Ahmad and Ibn Majah and others, لا يحل لمسلم باع من أخيه بيعا فيه عيب إلا بينه له. It is not halal for a Muslim to sell to his brother a defective item unless he shows him the defect. However, is the trade valid? The answer is that if the purchaser knows about the defect and he purchases it, then he has no choice and the trade is valid. But if the purchaser is unaware of the defect and he purchases the item, then even then the trade is valid because the purchaser can just carry on with the trade without returning the item, and the trade would be valid. Or the purchaser has a choice to refund the item when he finds out that there is a defect. There is a third option. He can take indemnity payment, which is the value which the item loses due to the defect, so that money can be returned to the purchaser. And at the same time, he keeps hold of the merchandise. Okay, what is the asl? What's the default ruling? That the seller sells a defective item or that he has sold a sound item? We say the default position is that the seller has sold you a sound item without any defect unless you can prove otherwise. And this is the default position in a case of a dispute and we do not know when this defect happened, before the sale or after the sale. Authentically, in the Sunan and others, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا اخْتَلَفَ الْمُتَبَايِعَانِ وَلَيْسَ بَيْنَهُمَا بَيِّنَةٌ فَالْقَوْلُ مَا يَقُولُهُ صَاحِبُ السِّلْعَةِ أَوْ يَتَرَادَّانِ. When the purchaser and the seller dispute and neither of them has evidence, then we go along with the statement of the seller, or they can simply annul the trade. And number 6, خيار الخلف في الصفة. And this is when the purchaser and the seller dispute about the description of the item, and we do not have any clear-cut evidence to settle the matter. Now, if there's a difference before the actual contract takes place, then of course they can just simply walk away from the contract, from the trade, and there's no problem. But what about after the trade has been concluded and then there's a dispute? If the item has not been destroyed or consumed or used up by the purchaser, then the weightier opinion here is that we accept the statement of the seller because of the hadith which we quoted a little earlier on. If the purchaser is not happy with this decision, then he can annul the trade, because the Prophet says, فَالْقَوْلُ قَوْلُ صَاحِبُ السِّلْعَةِ أَوْ يَتَرَادَّانِ, or they can each walk away from the trade. As for if the item is consumed or broken, then definitely the purchaser owes money to the seller. Now, in a case like this, we have a qaida, a guiding principle, which says that anytime a person owes another person the money, so he's a debtor, then we accept the statement of the debtor. So now it's a complete role reversal. The burden of evidence now would be upon the seller. And number 7, al-khulf fi qadr al-thaman, when they dispute about the price. Now again, if we have evidence, then the matter is settled. But what if we do not have any evidence, which could swing the pendulum one way or the other? Now again, the weightier opinion on this matter is that we accept the statement of the seller, using the evidence which we quoted before. And if the purchaser is not happy, then they can both walk away from the trade. However, what if the item is destroyed or consumed? It's impossible to walk away from the trade now. Definitely, money must be given to the seller. But how much money does the purchaser give? Because they're disputing about the price. In a case like this, it would be sensible to simply go with the market value. So we do not accept the claim of the seller nor the purchaser, but we simply look at the market value, and that would be the most just thing to do. And normally the markets do have a recommended retail price, which could solve the situation. Authentically in the Sunan, Abdullah bin Mas'ud sold a servant to another companion, Al-Ash'ath ibn Qais. Ibn Mas'ud said that I sold you this servant for 20,000. But Al-Ash'ath ibn Qais radiallahu anh, he said, no, I bought it for 10,000. And to this Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, إذا اختلف المتبايعان وليس بينهما بينة والمبيع قائم بعينه فالقول قول البائع أو يترادان البيع. When the two parties dispute, and neither of them has any evidence, and the merchandise still exists untouched, then we accept the statement of the seller, or they can both walk away from the trade. And Ibn Mas'ud goes on to say, فَإِنِّي أَرُدُّ الْبَيْعَ. So I am walking away from this trade. So, in conclusion, these are 7 types of khiyar that we have gone through, and will suffice ourselves with this much. Let us move on to the next chapter, which is of riba. And there are 5 main points of discussion in this chapter. But first of all, let us define our terms. Riba simply means az-ziyada, an increase. And in the Sharia, it is a stipulated increase on the capital sum. And riba, we know, is haram by the Quran, the Sunnah, and the consensus. Riba is also one of the mubiqat, one of the major sins, ones which will destroy you. And the Prophet ﷺ also cursed the one who consumes riba, or the one who gives it, or the one who even witnesses such a transaction, or the one who even writes it down, because they are assisting in this haram action. Authentically in the Sunan, the Prophet ﷺ said, الربا ثلاثة وسبعون بابا أيسرها مثل أن ينكح الرجل أمه. Riba is 73 doors or types, and the most trivial of which is that a man has intercourse with his mother. And apart from the textual prohibition, riba has much damaging effect on the economy and character of the people. It completely deprives a person of mercy and makes him chase after money, so that money becomes his purpose and pursuit in life. Okay, the first talking point is that the riba is of 2 types, al-fadl and al-nasi'a. As for riba al-fadl, then when you exchange 2 items which are ribawi of the same type, then they must be equal for equal in quantity. The ribawi types are food which are measured using the makil or wazn, that is weighed. Apart from that, they are also currency. So for example, exchanging good quality dates for poor quality dates must be in equal measure, so 1 sa for 1 sa. You cannot do 1 sa of good quality dates for 2 sa of poor quality dates. The quality does not matter, it's only the quantity which needs to be taken into account. However, you are allowed to exchange 1 sa of dates for 2 sa of wheat, because these are not of the same type. Dates are clearly a different type to wheat, even though they are both ribawi items. Riba nasi'a is simply delayed payment, even if the quantity is the same. So 1 sa of dates can be exchanged for 1 sa of dates on the spot. So you cannot exchange 1 sa of dates for 1 sa of dates to be paid tomorrow. That would be delayed payment. The same thing applies between dates and wheat. 1 sa of dates can be exchanged for 2 sa of wheat, no problem. However, if you say that you'll pay the 2 sa of wheat tomorrow, that would be haram. And the reason is, when you exchange 2 ribawi items which have the same illah, the same justification for them being riba, in this case we're talking about a food item which is measured using the sa', then it must be a hand-to-hand exchange on the spot. No delayed payment allowed, even if you do not have any quantitative excess. Because the one who pays at a later date, he is normally at an advantage. Do you not see that when you pay in installments, you end up paying more? And if you were to pay cash in hand, you would end up paying less. Why is that the case? Because delaying the payment and paying in installments or paying at a later date is an advantage. And the idea is, when you exchange 2 ribawi items, there must not be any advantage to one party over the other. So yes, there's no quantitative excess, that is true, but there is still an element of advantage. The second discussion point, that the riba runs on price. Whatever you're using as money in your country, riba runs on that. Now, many different things over the centuries have been used as money. It does not matter. Whatever your land is using as money, riba runs on that. And also, as stated before, it runs on every food which is measured using the sa' or weighed. And all of this is using analogy. In the pivotal hadith of Sahih Muslim, the Prophet mentioned that the riba runs on gold and silver. So we use analogy and say that this is pertaining to price, so that the riba runs on anything which is used as money, because gold and silver used to be used as money. He also mentions burr, wheat, sha'ir, barley, tamr, dried dates, milh, salt. So these 4 food items are makil, they are measured using the sa'. These food items are makil. The scholars also add the wazn element as well. So, for example, meat is weighed. Previously, we did say that you're not allowed to exchange a live animal for meat. And it is more sensible to restrict the generality of the narration prohibiting such a transaction, because it appears that that narration is prohibiting riba. Now, a riba would be that if you sell sheep meat, let's say, mutton, for a live sheep, and you do this with the intention of sacrificing the sheep to eat its meat, because then what you're doing is essentially you're exchanging meat for meat, and the meat is of the same type. Both are sheep meat. The problem is that it is impossible to know that we're selling the same amount of wheat because we cannot measure it. One is just meat and the other one is a live sheep. You cannot weigh the live sheep because the live sheep has other elements other than meat. It has bones and so on. So if it is the intention that you're going to sacrifice the sheep to eat the meat, then in effect you're exchanging meat for meat and you do not know that they are equal for equal in weight. And that becomes riba. However, we can say that if you're going to exchange meat for a live animal of the same type, not with the intention of sacrificing the animal to eat the meat, then the case can be made that this is permissible, as there is nothing to say that it is impermissible. And on this opinion, it would be permissible to sell, let's say, meat of a sheep for a cow. And we're talking about a live cow, because the 2 types of meat are different. So even if you did want to sacrifice this cow to eat its meat, in effect what you would be doing is that you would be exchanging the meat of a sheep for the meat of a cow, and that would be permissible, even if they're not equal in weight. Why? Because they're of different types. Just like exchanging dates for barley of unequal amount. It is permissible as long as it is done on the spot, hand-to-hand exchange. So the hand-to-hand exchange is a condition if the illah for the riba is the same. If the illah for the riba is not the same, then no condition applies. Neither riba al-fadl nor riba al-nasi'ah. So for example, you can exchange any amount of dates for any amount of meat, and you can have delayed payment on this as well, because the illah is different. One is makil, the other one is mawzoon, weighed. And the third discussion point is what we have said, but we'll just summarize it. If exchanging 2 items which are ribawi of the same type, then at-taqabud is a condition, which is a hand-to-hand exchange, and also at-tamathul, which is a like amount each. So let's say, for example, 1 sa for 1 sa, and so on, or 1 kilo for 1 kilo. And the fourth point is that if the illah of a riba is the same, but they're of different types, then you just have the taqabud to consider, and the fadl is not a condition. So you can exchange 1 sa of dates for 2 sa of barley, but it must be a hand-to-hand exchange, which is called taqabud. And the fifth discussion point, if the illah is different, then neither taqabud nor tamathul are a condition. You can exchange gold for barley. They will naturally not be of the same amount. How can they be? Gold is not measured using sa'. So the fadl is not even a question here. It doesn't even feature. And as for the taqabud, then no, this is not a condition because the illah of them being riba is different. So for example, the gold coins would be a price or a money. So that would be that illah. And the barley would be food. So that's a different illah entirely. So purchasing food to be paid at a later date is absolutely fine. In fact, the Prophet himself did it. In the Sahih, he purchased some food from a Yahudi and gave his chainmail as a pledge or a rahan. Let us move on to the 4th chapter of the sales contracts. And this is about selling fruits on a tree. There are 3 discussion points here. So the first point to note here is that the one who sells a date palm tree after he has pollinated it, that is to put the male part into the female part so that the fruits may be produced, if he sells the tree after he has pollinated the tree, then the fruits of the trees belong to the seller, not the purchaser, unless it be that the purchaser stipulates otherwise. And this rule is taken precisely from the authentic hadith in the Sahihain and others. The rationale behind this ruling is that as the seller, if you have pollinated the tree, then your heart will be attached to the fruits because the fruits will come out of your effort. And so because your heart will be attached to the fruits, the Sharia says that you have the right to the fruits. The second discussion point is that fruits are not permitted to be sold before they ripen and become good enough to eat. And again, in the authentic narration, we have the Prophet forbidding fruits being sold before they are ripened. Okay, so the question is, how do you tell the fruits are ripened? Well, then this depends on the different fruits. And the people of knowledge who grow these fruits, they will know when the fruits ripen and when they do not. So the point is, are they good enough to be consumed or not? Because before they're good enough to be consumed, the danger is they might be afflicted by blight, rendering the fruits useless. So you can see there is gharar involved if you purchase the fruits before they are good enough to eat. However, it should be noted that if you're selling a tree and on this tree there are fruits which have not fully ripened yet, but your intention is not to sell the fruits per se, but rather is to sell the whole tree. Now if that's the case, then it is permissible to sell the tree even if it has fruits which are unripened. The reason is because the fruits are in following the tree. They are not sold independently. So notice the difference. Also note that if some of the fruits become ripened on a tree, and the same ruling applies to crops as well, growing from the ground, if some of them become ripened and good enough to eat, then it is permissible to sell the whole lot altogether. So you have some which are ripened and some which are not ripened, let's say fruits on a tree. It is permissible to sell the whole lot of the fruits on the tree, even though you have some which are unripened. And this is to make life easier, because to say that every single individual unit must be ripened would cause difficulty. And normally what happens is that if some of the fruits on a tree ripen, then the other ones would follow likewise. That's normally the case. And so we can work in accordance with the usual scenario and make that assumption that the rest of them will also likewise become ripened. It is permissible to sell fruits before they ripened if the purchaser is going to cut the fruit there and then to feed his animals as fodder. That is permissible. But he's not allowed to purchase it for his own self because of the gharar involved. And the third discussion point is that if the purchaser purchases the fruits, but he has not, as of yet, picked them off from the tree, and then what happens is that a natural disaster occurs and the fruits are destroyed, then the purchaser does not have to pay the money. And the evidence for this is taken from the authentic hadith, where the Prophet said that you have no right to take the wealth of your brother without due right. However, if the seller says, look, come and take your fruits, you can pick them, and the purchaser spends an unusually long time in coming to pick the fruits, then if the fruits are damaged, then here we say it is the purchaser's fault. He should have picked the fruits. Why did he delay unnecessarily? And in a case like this, he would need to pay the money to the seller. So note the difference. Okay, now let us move to the 5th chapter of the wider book of Bay', and this is the sales transaction called a salam. And here we simply need to discuss the conditions for the salam to be valid. But before that, what is the salam? It is to pay now and take your item later. The item which is going to be taken later is an item which is described with all the necessary details. Such a trade was the usual practice for the people of Medina because it benefited both the seller and the purchaser. The Prophet allowed it, but with conditions. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِذَا تَدَايَنْتُمْ بِدَيْنٍ إِلَى أَجْلٍ مُسَمًّى فَاكْتُبُوا. O believers, when you contract a debt to be paid at a later date, then write it down. Ibn Abbas said that this is pertaining to the salam. It's actually pertaining to any debt, but salam is from the examples. Let's go through the conditions. So the first condition is that this item needs to be something whose description remains constant. This would not be a problem in those days with things like dates and barley and wheat, because when these things grow, they are normally the same shape and size and weight. There's consistency there. And nowadays, with items being manufactured in companies such as phones and so on, there's definitely going to be consistency. Phones and cars and computers, as they are manufactured, they are of the same description. Condition number 2, you need to make mention of what type of item you desire. So the description must be known, because the description is going to affect the price. Condition number 3, the amount you want. Now here, even if the item is normally measured using the sa', it is permissible to specify it in its weight, and vice versa. Any item which is weighed can be specified using the sa', because what matters here is the amount is specified. The units are not important in this particular case. As for riba, then it's a different matter. The makil is exchanged for makil, and the mawzoon is exchanged for mawzoon. So you cannot weigh that which is makil, nor vice versa. And condition number 4, that this item is in the liability of the seller up to an appointed term which is known. Because remember, the item is to be given at a later date, but that you take the money now. And this delay needs to be such that it has an effect on the price. So if you say that I will give you the item tomorrow, one day does not have an effect on the price. The delay needs to be such that it has an effect on the price. And condition number 5, this item must be such that it is usually present at the time of the payment of the item. So fruits of the summer cannot be stipulated for the winter. Remember, in a sales contract, you should have the ability to deliver the item. And fruits of the summer will not be present in the winter, so you will not have the ability to deliver the item to the second party. And number 6, that the price must be known fully. And this is the case with all trade contracts. And 7thly, that the price must be taken at the time of the contract, not later. Of course, that's the whole point about the salam contract, that you pay up in advance. Also note that the default rule is that the item is to be given to the purchaser in the same place as the contract, unless that is impractical. For example, the contract may have been made on an aeroplane in the sky. So in a case like this, the place of delivering the item must be specified. Okay, now let us move on to the 6th chapter in the book of Bay', which is qard, translated to loan. Now linguistically, al-qard means to cut, and in the Sharia, it means to give your wealth to somebody who will make use of it, and he will return to you wealth which is similar to it. Now what is the ruling on qard? Well, we say it is mandub, recommendation, because it is seen as ihsan. You are helping out a person who is in need. There is a hadith which says that 2 instances of giving a qard is equal to a single instance of giving charity. Because a qard is not exactly charity because you're asking for your wealth back. However, it is similar to charity in that you're at least helping out a person in need. As for actually taking a loan, then it is permissible to do so only in a need, like what the Prophet did, took out a young camel as a loan, and he actually paid back with a better quality camel. But this was not stipulated at the time of taking out the loan. He said, "Inna khiyarakum ahsanukum qada." The best of you are the best who pay back their loans. As for if you do not have a need, then do not take out a loan. It is at least makruh, because then you put yourself in debt. That is no good. The Prophet would seek refuge from being in debt. Paying back your debt is a serious matter. The Prophet said that the soul of a mu'min is in limbo when he dies until his debt is paid off. The Prophet ﷺ authentically in At-Tirmidhi and others said, "Man faraqa ruhu jasadahu wa huwa bari'un min thalathin dakhala al-jannah, al-kibru wad-daynu wal-ghulul." Whoever dies and he is free of 3 things will enter Jannah: pride, debt, and ghulul, stealing from the war booty. If you give somebody a loan and he is in straitened circumstances, it is wajib for you to give him respite. And if you can waive his debt off completely, then this will be better for you, though it is not obligatory to do so. As Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَإِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ وَأَن تَصَدَّقُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Let us take the first talking point, which is the conditions for a qard to be valid. So the first condition is what is being loaned must be known and described fully. So we're talking about the quantity and the quality must be known. And this is obvious because it's to avoid any disputes later on down the line. The lender says, "You owed me £100. The borrower says, "No, I owe you £80. So we do not want these disputes arising. And the second condition, the lender must be someone who has the right to give loans or to give donations. So this is the type of person who must be baligh, aqil, hur, free, rashid. He knows how to deal with his wealth, but also he must own this particular wealth. So if he, for example, is a wali of a yatim looking after the orphan's wealth, he is not allowed to give in charity from the wealth of the orphan. He is allowed to trade to try to increase the wealth, but he is not allowed to give in charity or donations or loans. So such a person is jaizut tasarruf, but he is not jaizut tabarru'. Tabarru' meaning giving donations, and that includes a loan. And so these are the 2 conditions for a loan to be correct. We have a second talking point, which is the rule that any loan which brings about a benefit which is stipulated, then this is riba. Previously, we said that the riba was of 2 types, al-fadl and al-nasi'a, and you can now add a third type as well, riba al-qard. Note a subtle point, however: if you give back more and it is not stipulated, then this is permissible. What is impermissible is to stipulate a benefit. Now let us move on to the next chapter, which is the 7th one of the Kitab al-Bay', which is Bab al-Rahan, the chapter of the pledge that you give. There are 3 talking points here. But firstly, what is a rahan? It is to guarantee a debt that is owed by giving a particular item as a pledge, such that if the debt is unable to be paid, then you can sell the item, the pledge, and redeem either all of the debt or at least some of the debt. For example, a person purchases something for £1,000 and he leaves his computer as a pledge. If he is unable to pay the £1,000, then the seller can sell this computer and take his price back from the price of the computer. Either this might be the whole £1,000 or at least some of it. So if it is, let's say, £800 which he takes back, then that leaves £200 as a debt remaining on the purchaser. What's the hukum? The Hukum is that this is jaiz. The Quran says, فَرِهَانٌ مَقْبُوضَةٌ, a pledge which is taken. So it makes it permissible. The Prophet gave his chainmail as a pledge for the price which he had to pay for some food which he bought from a Yahudi. The first talking point are the conditions for the rahan to be correct. So the first condition is that it needs to be given now. It must not be hinged on a future event. For example, the rahin says, when Ramadan enters, I'll give you such and such as a pledge. It is yours. The Hanbali madhab says that it has to be given or at least agreed on the spot. The Hanbali also says that it must be physically taken. Although we can dispute this, but the Hanbali madhab is that it has to be physically taken, maqbood. Condition number 2, that the rahan must be something which can be sold. Because this is the whole point. It should be something which can be sold. Otherwise, how are you to redeem your debt? So it cannot be a bottle of wine, nor a dog. And the third condition, the rahin must be the owner of the rahan, or at least someone given permission to give this item as a rahan. And this condition is common sense. After all, the rahan could be sold, and you're not allowed to sell an item without the good will and contentment of the owner. Condition number 4, the rahan must be known, meaning it's a description, so that there are no disputes later on. So these are 4 conditions. 3 of these conditions are definitely conditions. As for the first condition, that it has to be given now and not allowed to be given later on, then this can be disputed. And the second talking point, we say the rule is that the rahan is an amana, a trust, with the murtahin, the one who takes the pledge. This murtahin is not allowed to make use of this pledge, except if it is an animal which can be ridden and milked, in which case he has to spend on this animal from his own pocket. And this is in return for riding the animal and milking it. Because in making use and benefiting from the rahan, you would resemble a person who gives a loan and derives a benefit from the loan. So then, in the same way, the murtahin is not allowed to derive a benefit from the rahan, unless it be an animal which can be ridden on and milked, in which case he may do so, but then he has to pay for the expenditure of the animal, the food and drink. But if the rahan is a car, for example, then no, you cannot take benefit from a car, because the car is not such that you have to feed it or give it to drink, unlike an animal. But in this case, he has to fear Allah, and he has to ride on the animal in proportion with what he spends on the animal. So it needs to be proportional. He's not allowed to take more benefit than what he spends on the animal. And the third and final discussion is the rule, whoever takes an item for his own benefit and then he claims that he returned it, his statement is not to be accepted unless he has evidence. This rule applies when there is a dispute. He says, I returned the item. The other person says, no, you did not return it. So the burden of proof is on the one who makes the claim that he returned the item, because the asl is that he has not returned the item and that he is still making use of it. So a murtahin would come under this category because he has taken the item for his benefit. His benefit is that his debt is being secured. As for the one who takes an item for the benefit of the other party, such as safe depositing, then if he claims that he returned the item, then he is to be believed. He does not need to give evidence. And the reason for the difference of ruling here is because in the second category, the person taking the item not for his benefit is a muhsin. And Allah says, مَا عَلَى الْمُحْسِنِينَ مِن سَبِيلٍ. There is no way of reproach against the muhsinin. So his claim is to be accepted. Let us move on to the 8th chapter. And this is the chapter of Ad-Daman and Kafala. And there are 4 discussion points here. First of all, the definitions. What is Daman? It means to guarantee something. A person owes £1,000 to another, and now a third party comes along and says to the creditor, look, if your debtor is unable to pay you your money when the due date arrives, then I will pay you in his lieu. So you see, he's standing as a guarantor. The ruling on Ad-Daman is that it is jaiz. Authentically in the Sunan, the Prophet said, Az-Za'imu Gharim. The Za'im, or the guarantor, is a gharim, he's a debtor, so he owes the debt. Okay, the first discussion point are the pillars of the Dhaman, meaning what is this whole situation of Dhaman composed of? Well, the pillars are, firstly, the Dhamin, the one who is guarantor. Secondly, the Madmoon, meaning that which is guaranteed, and that is the actual debt which is owed, the money, or whatever the debt may be. And the third rukn, the Madmoon an, and this is the person who owes the debt, the debtor. And fourthly, the Madmoonun lahu, the one for whom the guarantee is being made, and that is the creditor, the one to whom the debt is owed. The second talking point is that the creditor, the one to whom the debt is owed, the one we said who is the Madmoon lah, he can demand his debt either from the Dhamin or from the original debtor who is the Madmoon an. Let us talk about the Kafala. This is similar to the Dhaman, except it is to say that the Kafil will bring the debtor to the creditor, because it may be that the creditor fears that the debtor is going to flee. So in comes the Kafil and he says, no, I stand as a guarantor that I will bring this debtor to you when the due date arrives. And if the Kafil is unable to bring the debtor to the creditor, then the Kafil becomes the guarantor. He would have to pay off the debt. Al-Kafala is permissible. Yaqub alayhi salam told his sons he wanted to take Binyamin to Egypt because Yusuf alayhi salam demanded his brother back. Yaqub alayhi salam said, I will not let him go until you give me a guarantee that you will bring him back to me. So you see this idea of bringing a person to the owner of the right. Okay, so the third talking point in this chapter is the Argan of the Kafala, and they are also four. Firstly, it is the Kafil, and this is the guarantor. Secondly, the Makful, this is the person who is the debtor, who will be brought to the creditor. Third, we have the Makfulun lah, and this is the creditor, the one to whom the debt is owed. And fourthly, we have the Makfulun li ajlih, and this is the actual debt, whatever the money is, or whatever the debt is. And the fourth talking point, if the Kafil brings the Makful to the Makfulun lahu, then the Kafil has discharged his obligation, and there is nothing more upon him to do. And it cannot be said that the Kafil has to pay off the debt, because he has done his job in bringing the Makful to the Makfulun lah. Likewise, if the Makful dies, then there is nothing on the Kafil. Whereas in a guarantee situation, if the Madmoon anhu dies, then the Dhamin still has to pay off the debt. Notice the difference. Let us move on to the 9th chapter, which is of Al-Hawala. There are two discussion points here. But first of all, Al-Hawala, what is it? It is to transfer a debt from one person to another. The way this works is that, suppose person B owes person A £100. However, person C owes person B £100 as well. Person B, who currently cannot pay person A, tells person A, look, person C owes me £100. So the £100 which I owe you, why don't you go to person C and take your £100 from him? So you see, person B has transferred person A to person C. Hawala is permissible, and the Prophet ordered that if you are transferred, then you should accept this transferal. So the first talking point are the conditions for the Hawala to be valid. Condition number 1, that the two debts must be the same in amount. They must be the same type. So for example, pounds and pounds, or it could be wheat, and so on. So they must be the same type. They're not allowed to be the different types. And they must also be due at the same time. It mustn't be the case that one of them is due now and the other debt is due in 1 year's time. You must not have that type of disparity. They both must be due now, meaning at the time of the Hawala. The second condition is that the amounts of both of these debts must be known, because we must not have any ignorance or jahala in these matters. The third condition, the debt which is being transferred to must be a confirmed debt. An example of an unconfirmed debt would be, for example, the price for a merchandise during the Shartul Khiyar, because during this time it is possible that the purchaser changes his mind and does not want the item anymore. So this debt is unconfirmed. Likewise the Mukataba, which we'll speak about later, and the Sadaq, Qabl al-Dukhul, Mahar, before you consummate the marriage. This is not a confirmed debt, and we are due to speak about these matters later. And fourthly, that the one doing the transferal must be happy with this. In our example, the one doing the transferal was person B. He must be happy. Person A or person C, their contentment is not to be considered. So person A cannot say, no, I'm going to take my debt from you, person B. I do not want to go to person C. Because the hadith orders him to go to person C. And just take a note, we said one of the conditions was that the timing of the debt must be the same. So they both must be owed right now. This is the Hanbali madhab, although it can be argued back by saying that this is not a condition and there is no problem in referring someone to a debt which is not yet due, but will be due later on. And in fact, this makes life more flexible and easier. And there is nothing to say that this is haram. The second discussion point is to say that if the hawala is valid, and the muhil, the one doing the transferring, he does not owe the debt anymore. Let us move to the 10th chapter, Babu Sulh, the chapter of reconciliation. And this is where you reach an agreement to end a dispute. So for example, one person may make a claim against another. If the one against whom the claim is made, if he denies this claim, he knows in a court of law he's going to have to take an oath, but he does not feel sure because he thinks maybe it is possible that he owes the other something. So he does not want to take the oath in a court of law. So he goes for an out-of-court settlement and agrees to pay back something of the debt. If they agree to this, then that is a sulh. The ruling on sulh is that it is permissible as long as nothing haram is involved. We can say there are three types of sulh. One where the debtor acknowledges the debt. Yeah, he could pay back some of the debt, or he could give him something other than the original debt. So for example, the claim is made that you owe me a sheep, and he says, yes, I owe you a sheep, but in return I'll give you back not the sheep but some clothing. So this is a settlement that can be made. The second type is if he denies the debt, but he still makes an out-of-court settlement because he does not want this to go to court. The third type is when the debtor just remains silent. He neither acknowledges nor denies, but still makes a sulh just to get the claimant off his tail. Okay, so the first talking point is if the debtor acknowledges the debt and makes a sulh by giving him part of the debt, and both parties are happy with this, then this sulh is correct. Note here that for this to be correct, the debtor must acknowledge the debt out of his own accord. Note that the debtor must not say, I'll only acknowledge the debt if you reduce it to half, because this would be a type of bribery. He must fully acknowledge it out of his own accord, and then the creditor can cut it down to a half, or whatever else. The second talking point, a sulh is valid pertaining to a debt which is unknown. And this could happen. It may be that two people made a dealing with each other, and after some time passed, they forgot what the debt was. They know that there is a debt, but it's just that they do not know how much it is or what it is. So in a case like this, it is still permissible and valid to make a sulh contract. Let us take some review questions at this stage. Question number 1. Give the conditions for the hawala to be correct. Question number 2. Give the conditions for the qard to be correct. And question number 3. Give the conditions for the rahan to be correct.